Welcome everybody to today's webinar. Today we are here to talk about neighbor issues. This is part one of a two-series webinar. My name is Paula Price. I'm with the People's Law School and I will be your host and moderator today. In just a few minutes, I'll introduce you to our incredible guest speakers, Anil Agarwal, a lawyer with Alexander Holborn in Vancouver, and Constable Jason Doucette with the Vancouver Police Department. I would like to mention that today's webinar is produced in collaboration with the Blockwatch Society of British Columbia. And if the Blockwatch Society is new to you, it is a province-wide crime prevention program founded just over 40 years ago that is designed to keep neighborhoods safer. And it brings the police and communities together with their common goal of community safety. So a big thank you and welcome to all the Blockwatch community members who are joining us here today and whose contributions have really helped us create this webinar for you. Now, today's webinar is about neighbor issues in BC. And the topics that we're going to cover today relate to noise, dogs, smoke, difficult neighbors, privacy and reputation, and when to involve the police. There will be another webinar on April 22nd where we're going to talk about fences, trees, property nuisance, parking and dealing with conflict. Now, these questions that you'll be learning about today are ones that were provided to us from Blockwatch Society members. We circulated a survey to them and received over 100 responses. And so a big thank you to the Blockwatch Society members who have contributed significantly to today's programming by sharing their questions with us. And we have distilled those questions into themes, and we've tried to select the questions that are most representative of the issues that you had questions about. So what you can expect today, we've got about 60 minutes together. You will receive answers to common questions. What you'll be learning is legal information, not legal advice, and it is current as of today. Now, if what you're looking for is legal advice, in other words, the law as it applies to your unique set of circumstances, we encourage you to reach out to a lawyer. You're welcome to reach out to our speaker, Anil Agarwal. His contact information is on the screen. And if you have questions about bylaws, you can reach out to your local municipality. If you've got questions about police-related issues, you can reach out to your local police agency. And if you're looking for information about your local Blockwatch program, you can go to the blockwatch.com website, which is featured on this slide. We, the People's Law School team, would like to acknowledge that we are grateful to work on the unceded traditional territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations, whose peoples continue to live on and care for these lands. And we invite everybody who has joined us today to reflect upon where it is that they are joining us from. We would like to thank our funders, the Department of Justice Canada, the Law Foundation of BC, and the Notary Foundation of BC, whose financial support makes it possible for us to produce these webinars. And finally, last but not least, we would like to thank our speakers. So we have Anil Agarwal. Anil is a lawyer and partner with Alexander Holborn in Vancouver, British Columbia, and he practices in the areas of insurance, strata, and residential tenancy law. Anil is a return speaker to the People's Law School. He was with us in September of 2023, talking about evictions and evictions. Anil, welcome. We're so thrilled to have you here today.
Thank you, Paula.
Thank you. And we would also love to welcome Constable Jason Doucette. Constable Doucette is he is with the Vancouver Police Department. He is currently their social media officer, and previously he's been with them for 24 years, and 4 years of that time he was a neighborhood police officer. So Constable Doucette, who he has told me we can call him Jason today. So Jason has told me that he has the background, and we're thrilled to have him here today to share the police perspective on our questions. So welcome, Jason. It's great to have you here.
Thanks for having me.
Amazing. Thank you. And before we dive into the first question, I also wanted to thank our guests once again. Thank you, everybody who has joined us here today. We are very excited to have you here. So the first question is for Anil. And the question is this: what can I do about a neighbor who blasts their music all day at a volume that is totally unnecessary?
Great question, Paula. And I think before I begin the answer, you know, when I look at the topics today, noise, barking, what have you, the underlying theme is what we call in the law a nuisance. And nuisance can mean many things to many people, but let's, for the purposes of today, ground ourselves in what the legal definition of nuisance is. And that is a substantial and unreasonable interference with a person's right to enjoy property. It may include interference with one's health, comfort, and convenience. Uh, but that annoyance, if you can call that, has to be substantial. It can't be considered to be trivial or trifling or slight. It has to be something persistent, ongoing, and profound. And it's further contextualized by a myriad of factors, including perhaps what neighborhood you're living in, the nature of that neighborhood, the length, duration, severity of that annoyance. And so when we take all those factors together, that's how we come up with, is this issue, in this case, noise, a nuisance? And so I think being in a neighborhood, the first thing you'd want to do if it was me was, if I know my neighbors well enough, is to perhaps go over and say, hey, I know this has happened a lot, and I'd appreciate it if you could keep it down. And that would be, I would say, the neighborly thing to do. However, that often does not result in, it may not result in the outcome that you'd like. So your next step is realistically to start documenting the noises, the timing of when it's happening. If it's 11 p.m., begin a logbook. And this is what the law generally requires, because, once you can't get the remedy you seek, the next position is, well, what's the worst outcome that could potentially happen, which is getting somebody like me involved. But before you want to get to me, you want to have your ducks in a row. And so having evidence, having documentation of the timing, the length, duration, severity is really helpful. Phone apps today do have decibel readers on them. And if properly calibrated, it's something you might want to download and utilize to at least be able to show, what is a baseline of noise without the annoyance, and when it is active, how high can it get? And if you read the literature, you'll see that that often courts and tribunals will rely on the World Health Organization guidelines for sound noise, and anything above 50 decibels can sometimes be considered unreasonable, and so documenting it is helpful. Once you have that all together, and if it's continuing persistent and you still feel like you have an open line of communication with your neighbor, by all means, revert back, perhaps come armed with some examples. Examples are always helpful. It helps reduce chances of denial. But if all else fails, it comes back into your context. If you're in a tenancy environment where it's your neighboring tenant, well, you have recourse under the Tenancy Act to your landlord. They have an obligation to maintain your right to quiet enjoyment. If you're in the strata context, this is where perhaps you might want to make a complaint to your strata council. The council under the Strata Property Act is obligated to enforce bylaws, to investigate your complaints. And to do that, though, they're going to need your documented evidence of these alleged sounds before they can write a bylaw complaint letter. If you're in the detached home situation, well, your remedies are obviously a lot less. And realistically, that might involve going to the city and having them get involved, making a complaint, again, providing them with the evidence. If you have recordings, just as good, and that perhaps is required. But I did do some digging, and I came across a case that kind of revolved around this. And even though the owners did the documentation, the court said some time ago that even if there is noise in urban society, a certain amount of give and take is necessary among neighbors. So in order to really get a remedy, you're really going to have and be able to substantiate that level of noise was so significant and unreasonable that it warrants a remedy. If things really escalate, and I'll leave it to Jason to jump in there, but perhaps calling the police non-emergency line might be an option. But your last resort, and I always say it's your last resort, is to come to somebody like me who can provide legal advice and perhaps, provide a legal remedy. Sometimes a demand letter might be all it takes to get somebody to quiet down.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Anil. And you set us up really nicely for this next question, which is for Jason. What can I do about excessive party noise after 11 p.m.? What's the best way to approach a neighbor in advance?
I would say the best way is to approach your neighbors, get to know your neighbors while emotions are low. There's no conflict. You get to reach out, get to know each other a little bit better, and feel it out. Maybe there's an opportunity to exchange phone numbers in case of emergencies. Some people travel, some people work, some people have pets. So to have that extra contact, that able to contact through a text, hey, things are a little bit loud, or you, for your dog's barking, one of those things. But also, it's also harder to inconvenience your neighbor when you're friends. When it's personal, you might feel more comfortable approaching them, or them approaching you as well. And if you're planning a party, or if they're planning a party, the polite thing to do is often just to knock on the door and give them the heads up. And if you can do that well in advance, say, hey, next Friday, my daughter's turning X amount. We're going to have people over. It's going to be a bit loud. We share a common wall. Love for you to come. Or, I'm assuring you that it's going to be over at 11 or 9, or giving some expectations so they know things are temporary and it's not a regular thing. If that isn't an option, I do recommend, like Anil was saying as well, is to educate yourself on some of the bylaws, some of the local town, some local rules, and to document. The documentation is a big thing for us as well, because if it does get to a point where you have to contact the police and we do show up, or for bylaw, one of the first things we're going to do is ask you for a history, but also for us to move forward with any sort of ticketing or escalation enforcement, we also have to document on our end, and your logbook and that information, and how it's, because a lot of that information is subjective. So it may not bother me, but it may bother you. And I really encourage people um, to dig deep and to put in there why it's bothering you. It's not just, oh, the stereo's loud, I don't like the music. It's because I can't sleep, or because of all these other things. The other thing to consider when you do call us, although we can be discreet and we try to be, and we don't want to go in and knock on the door and say your neighbor is complaining and it's Susie and blah blah blah. Have that discussion with the police when they do show up about confidentiality, because sometimes we can't guarantee that, and a lot of the times we can't. We can get around it, but just to give you some realistic expectations. Have that discussion with the officers when they get there, or when you're making a complaint to the city or to any other bodies.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Jason.
And sorry, just to jump in there, and following up on what Jason's comment about, perhaps somebody might be sensitive, you know, uh, underlying the test of nuisance is based on the objective person. So yeah, you might have, you may be sensitive to noise, but that makes the noise more subjective than it is objective. And so the basis is, would the reasonable objective person believe or perceive that noise to be unreasonable? But yeah, thanks, Jason. That was a great way to get that in there.
Super. Thank you. And this next question is for you. I live next to a music venue. I've asked them to keep the doors closed to reduce the noise. They agree, but people in the venue keep leaving the door propped open. The noise is loud and runs late into the night. What can I do?
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't think the advice changes much. Although, when we're talking about a music venue, sometimes there's a difference between the entity or individual who operates the venue and the individual who actually owns the venue. And so I think if you've spoken to the venue, confirm if they are just a tenant. If there's a landlord, you'd also want to know that the owner of the property or property management company, because they have corresponding obligations to each other. And if the tenant of the property, the commercial tenant, I would say, has given you this assurance but can't uphold their end of the bargain, you might have an ability to talk to the landlord, the owner of the property, because they're more interested and they don't want to see any type of enforcement from against their venue from the city, for example. Again, it comes down to context, duration, and severity. And so, if this is a one-off that happens perhaps once, a blue moon, it's just an unfortunate occurrence. But if it's happening with some regularity, I think this is a situation where, the city would take more of an active interest in it, because it is a commercial entity, and the obligations of a commercial vendor are much higher. In addition, depending on the environment, if you're in a strata environment, again, bylaw enforcement is always a key component. But if it's a tenancy arrangement, well, then you might not be able to actually rely on the Tenancy Act, because the Residential Tenancy Act does not include jurisdiction over commercial claims. And so that would bring you back into more of a detached setting about a claim strictly, or an issue strictly against a third party entity. But again, key components, documentation, recording of the noise if you have it, having witnesses perhaps who be able to help you and assist you and give positive evidence if you make that complaint. And if the landlord doesn't take any action vis-a-vis a commercial tenant, then escalating it to the city for assistance would be your next option. But I guess at all points, ensuring your own personal safety, not putting yourself in a situation to go outside and confront these individuals. Your individual safety is paramount, and putting yourself in a situation where that is in jeopardy or could be jeopardized is not advisable from my perspective.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Anil. Anil, we're moving into the next section, which is about dogs. And the first question continues on the theme of noise, which is, my neighbor's dog barks all day long. What can I do about it?
Yeah, so unfortunate. And I had that situation myself until that dog went away. I don't know how, but it's no longer there. But again, and I think Jason had some really great comments. Making your neighbors your friends makes it a lot easier to talk about the issues you're dealing with. But if all that fails, again, documentation. I will say, at least I'll just use the city of Vancouver. Because that's where I live, as an example. But the city bylaws do have very clear standards and requirements for pet owners, and that is that your dog cannot be allowed to bark uncontrollably to an unreasonable fashion. Again, unreasonable is contextually driven, but I find the smaller dogs, Chihuahuas, generally tend to be the more yappy, so it'd be a higher pitched, and if that goes on for prolonged periods of time, I totally appreciate it. And if your neighbor is not responsive, unfortunately your recourse is realistically to go to the city for assistance, beyond moving to legal advice or legal assistance, and again, documenting it. And when you get to if you get to the point where legal advice is required, you have a couple of options. And this, again, goes back to the issue of noise we talked about earlier, is that you can file a claim for nuisance, depending on how much you want to sue for. And there are different venues. There's something called the Civil Resolution Tribunal, which is British Columbia's online, frankly, Canada's first online tribunal to handle small claims up to a limit of $5,000. There is Small Claims Court, our provincial court, which has jurisdiction over claims up to $35,000, and then the BC Supreme Court, which is everything over and above $35,000, generally speaking. I can tell you that there have been many claims of this nature. They generally come in the Civil Resolution Tribunal because it's designed for lay people without legal experience, to give them their day in court and to have their voices heard. And so it's a great venue. It's all online, and it's designed to help you achieve resolution within 90 days. And so once you've mustered up all the evidence, you've requested your neighbor to perhaps take control of their pet by reducing their barking, and all else fails, and police intervention is not really warranted, or at least Jason, get him to comment on that one. But if it's not warranted and the city's not doing anything to help you, well then, having a monetary claim, if you should succeed, is pretty convincing for some people to alter their conduct. And so we see that as a last ditch effort is litigation. And that's one method of handling an uncontrolling or barking dog, or at least getting to the ultimate way to stop a dog from barking, one would hope.
Super. Excellent. Thank you, Anil. And I'll just mention for everybody who is here today who's interested in the CRT, the Civil Resolution Tribunal, as a potential venue, we do plan to have a webinar about how to take advantage of that process, probably in the fall of this year. So stay tuned for that. This next question is also for you, Anil, relating to dogs. My neighbor lets their dog off leash and it tears up my yard and poops on my property. What can I do?
Yeah, again, very unfortunate. I live on a corner lot, so hey, guess what? I get both the barking dog and the poop, which is very annoying. So if your neighbor is not responsive, I think, again, documenting it. Now, I have set up cameras on my property with a purview over my lawn, so I can actually see which dog is leaving me a present to pick up for the next day. And if I can locate and isolate the individual, again, they pass, and I'll effectively ask them to rein in their pet's conduct. But if they don't, And again, if the city and the city's bylaws, at least for the city of Vancouver, again, and I assume this is widespread across the province, there's going to be an animal control bylaw or pet control bylaw that's going to account for an owner's obligation to address excrement immediately upon release. The same thing is going to be found in strata bylaws, or ought to be found in strata bylaws. And again, the Tenancy Act should cover this in some form or fashion in terms of landlord's obligation and quiet enjoyment. All else fails, and they've damaged your yard. Well, nuisance aside, there's something also called negligence, right? And negligence has a couple of components to it. And, there's the first aspect is there a duty of care? And so a duty of care means, well, do I owe you an obligation? Well, I assume if I've got my dog and I'm walking them on your lawn, I would argue that there's a duty of care to ensure that when I have my dog, that they're not going to ruin your lawn. The second component is, what is the standard of care? The standard of care often involves, well, what would the reasonable person do in this situation? And I would say, if a reasonable person has their dog defecate on somebody's lawn, that person's going to pick it up immediately and remove it. That's what a reasonable person would do. If a person doesn't do that immediately, well, then it seems to suggest that there is that they've breached the standard of care. That's just a legal term, meaning they haven't done what a normal person would do. The next issue comes to be, well, is there damages? Well, in this case, it seems if there could be damages. Tearing up your lawn, lawns, crows aside, lawns in Vancouver can be difficult to maintain, especially with the weather as it is. So if that lawn's damaged, it can take a pretty penny to put it back together. Well, then you have to, my lights just turned off, apologies, but then you have to consider, well, is the conduct directly linked to the damage? If you can get all those four things together, if those ducks line up in a row, you've effectively made out a claim for negligence. And so, your last ditch resort would then be to bring a claim. Again, perhaps a CRT is a reasonable place to bring it, given the amount likely to be involved. But that's how effectively, you could deal with a dog claim if you have a non-responsive neighbor who lets their dog onto your property.
Thank you so much, Neil, and thank you for sharing your personal experience.
Yeah, unfortunate.
It's very relatable, and we appreciate it. Jason, this next question is for you. And again, on the topic of dogs, my neighbor has an aggressive dog, and I'm scared that it will hurt someone. What can I do about it?
If there's an immediate threat, so the dog is actively chasing somebody, or someone's imminently going to be hurt, 911. There's a lot more of us than there is bylaw people, and we can get there and we can kind of help settle the situation and get everyone safe. If there isn't an imminent threat, there's a City of Vancouver, they've got some rules in place. You can call their animal control. You can go to 311, call 311, or go to their van app, to the city's app, and you can make a complaint through there. The other part too, in Vancouver at least, and I'm sure it's throughout the province, there's a designation that can be made towards dangerous dogs, or aggressive dogs, I'm sorry. So there's new rules that come with that as well. So they have to be muzzled. They can't go to certain places unless they're muzzled. They must be on a leash, and sometimes a shorter leash. If that fails, there's other tools in our tool belt from a policing standpoint where there's tickets. There's tickets for off leash. Do you have a license? Do you have the license on? So there's several ways that we'll try to communicate with the dog owner, because ultimately it's somebody's pet, but we have to look after people's safety first. So we will explain all those options to the people, but in the end, if it's 911, if it's happening now, 911, please feel comfortable calling us, and we'll do our best to settle the situation and come up with a solution.
Okay. Thank you so much, Jason. I appreciate the range of options depending on what it is that you're addressing. This next question is for Anil. My neighbor chain smokes on their deck all day long. The smoke wafts over to our yard and ruins our outside time. It even enters our house through open windows. Is there anything we can do about it?
I would say to you, we've, without being a horse to death, I think we've established the pathways that you can ultimately take to document and to escalate your situations to the ultimate end of litigation should it get there. I would think that the remaining and outlying issue is, does this smoke pose a health risk to you? For some individuals who have respiratory issues, a diagnosed health issue. And if that is the case, and this smoke, and say you're not on your patio, but you're in your own home, hoping to be in the safety of your own home, and that smoke is penetrating, your windows or your walls, getting through into your home, and it's adversely affecting your health to the point where it becomes a health concern. One option available to you is something called getting an injunction. And so an injunction is based on a couple of things. The first question is there a serious issue to be tried? And one would say that, smoke consistently entering one's home from a neighboring property is a serious issue because the underlying issue is nuisance, as we discussed earlier. The second and perhaps the most important issue to be addressed is irreparable harm. If a person can prove irreparable harm that's not speculative, that will almost always carry the day. And so if I say to you, well, I have a diagnosed respiratory condition that is adversely affected by smoke, and I could actually give way to an emergent situation which would require medical care, perhaps hospitalization, that could not perhaps be repaired, or one could argue that is irreparable harm to one's self. And then the third element of the test is balance of convenience, and this would mean, well, what's more fair? Telling somebody that I can't smoke, or allowing somebody to be subjected to smoke that may adversely or will adversely impact their health to the point of hospitalization. If you can establish all those three questions in the positive for yourself, the court may be open to granting an injunction that would prevent that person from smoking for the interim period while the ultimate issue of nuisance is determined. And so that's one option that might be out there and available if the smoking is that significant. Otherwise, we default back to the more litigation orientation of, is it a nuisance claim, which would require you to go through the rigors of a court process or tribunal process.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Neil. Jason, this next question is for you. One of my neighbors has mental health or addiction issues. They knock on my door and my neighbor's doors late at night, wanting to talk, but they're unwilling to seek help. I feel unsafe and sometimes harassed. What can I do?
If it's happening at the time and you fear for your safety or for the safety of somebody else, please call 911 while it's happening. We do ask that be descriptive when you're calling 911 and go with your gut. Like if you're at home and you feel unsafe because of this behavior, go with your gut, call 911. Our dispatchers will ask you for information, and please be patient with them and try to drill down on, I have this uneasy feeling in the pit of my stomach, and it's because of, and then they'll ask you some questions and just really try to be descriptive. I'm fearful that they're going to, bang harder and come through the door. They actually kick the door when they knock. And that paints a picture for the priority for the police officers that will be attending, whether or not officers will be dispatched. If it's not happening at the time and it's something that's ongoing, or you hear it from a neighbor, there's community police officers throughout the city of Vancouver. Please feel comfortable with contacting them or going by and talking to your neighborhood police officer. Or you can contact our non-emergency line if it's something that's reoccurring and it's just something that you just feel that needs to be documented in case it happens again. You can contact our non-emergency line. That goes back to the documentation aspect that Anil was speaking about earlier. Documentation is key. So whether when this is starting to happen, whether you send yourself an email or whether you're opening up you have a notebook or however you choose to document it, that'll be an important piece for us later. Because this behavior may also be a single piece and a part of a larger puzzle for us. And it could be mental health, it could be substance use. But once that information is received, we may be able to provide assistance through some of our wraparound services, or, a lot of these times arresting, you're not going to arrest your way out of these sort of situations. And also, depending on your housing situation, your strata or the landlord tenancy, your landlord. But please feel comfortable calling us. If something's going on and you don't feel safe, we're here to help.
Amazing. Thank you, Jason. This next question, my upstairs neighbor is a heavy drinker. My upstairs rental neighbor is a heavy drinker and pot smoker who's also belligerent and rude. He uses a propane tank, and we've already had a fatal fire, and we think that he drives under the influence. We worry about his safety and the safety of others, but we're afraid to approach him. What can we do?
Again, if it's happening now and you're seeing somebody go towards their vehicle and you believe that their ability to operate that vehicle is impaired, 911, that is the best option. We are going to ask you questions about what type of drive or what type of vehicle is it, if you have a license plate, why do you think that person is impaired? And we will drill down on that while we're sending police officers. I want people to know that when you're on the phone with our dispatchers, they're not usually it's not just one person on the phone when in an emergency. There's several people working in the background, dispatching police officers, sending us messages on our laptops, and we are starting that ball rolling to get there to help. If it's not happening and you have questions about it and you're suspicious, you can speak with your neighborhood police officer. If you want to document it, you can call our non-emergency line or visit our website for additional reporting options. I know many municipalities now and police forces have the online ability. If you really don't want to get involved, because sometimes we can't guarantee your confidentiality, Crime Stoppers is still a viable option. I know a lot of people kind of forgotten about Crime Stoppers, but they are still available. As far as the propane and you feel unsafe, the Vancouver Fire Rescue in our city would be able to provide you with the best advice for that. But if you feel it's unsafe, look around for the answers, look around for some assistance, because we'd rather you ask now than respond to an emergency later on.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Jason. And it sounds like there are various sources depending on the municipality. And so we will link to some of the sources that you've mentioned, and also encourage everyone to look for the sources that are relevant to them in their municipality. So thank you very much. Anil, turning back to you, we have a question here. Is it legal for my neighbor to film me using their phone when I'm on my property outside or in my home? Also, are they allowed to have their security camera pointed at my home or have parts of my home in the footage?
Yeah, great questions. I think to the first one about a neighbor filming, one person on their phone when on the property or in the home, I think, again, it's context driven. There's nothing per se illegal about filming somebody, but it's all kind of contextualized, right? If, you're outside your property and you're engaging in bad behavior, I'll call it, and somebody is trying to document it, as we're suggesting that you document the other party for their poor conduct, that might be seen as a legitimate purpose, at least in that instance, for recording, you when you're outside. But you're out in the open, and the expectation of privacy when you're out in the open is a lot more reduced. However, when you move into your private home, however, well, I would ask, well, how are they actually in your home filming you? Have they broken into your home? And that invites a different conversation. So, it's very context driven. But if they're filming you with the intention of using it for a commercial purpose, for example, well, then that invites also a different conversation. Now, if it's for a commercial purpose, one would assume that there's a commercial entity behind that purpose. And then do they owe you right to privacy? And there is legislation out there that would suggest they do, and as a result, they would require consent. So it's a very context-driven analysis of when it would be lawful or unlawful. However, I start from the basics of if you're outside on your property, it's generally there is a potential to do so, but as we get into the context, understanding why it's occurring, that may help better determine whether it is lawful or not. With respect to the other question, having a neighbor point their camera at your home or a part of your home. I'm just going to refer to a case because this is what happens in this case, and the court came out with very interesting, helpful commentary. And the case is called Suzuki and Monroe. The citation, if you're interested to read it later, is 2009 BCSC 1403. And in this case, the defendants, I'll call them, had surveillance cameras which captured the plaintiffs, the Suzuki's, which captured the entrance areas of their home area. So had a good caption of it. And the court here says that activities designed to annoy one's neighbors and having little or no redeeming social utility are unreasonable and should be discouraged by the law. And this was done in the context of a nuisance claim, so a privacy nuisance. And so I would say to you, if the only reason your neighbors have erected these cameras is to annoy you, to bother you, to surveil you without any basis for doing so, I think that's where it becomes into, are they allowed? Perhaps not. But if it's, incidental, capturing, a portion of your property, your doorway, if it's incidental to their overall purpose, which is just to ensure that their property is not damaged by, third parties, then it might be seen as lawful. And what I do in my practice is I encourage anyone who tries to erect a camera to ensure that when they're doing so, they do it with the intent that it captures the least amount of property beyond one's home as possible. When assisting strata corporations, people want to put up doorbell cameras because they have Amazon packages that they don't want to see go missing. Again, when we draft those bylaws, we encourage corporations to say that if you put up a camera, it can only go so far in terms of recording, or the area that which it can record. So it all comes down to, again, intent and the level of interference. And if there's a purpose behind it that is of value, societal value, it's probably going to be permissible.
Excellent. Thank you, Anil. Anil, this next question is also for you. What can I do if someone in my community posts illegitimate complaints and defamatory comments about me in a public forum?
Yeah, the first thing I would do is I would start taking screenshots of that. If you believe it to be defamatory in nature or illegitimate, the first thing I want to do is gather everything that I have. And so, if we're on social media, for example, and someone's put up a post, one of the elements of defamation is it has to be published. So not only is it put on there, but that's publishing, but then you want to know, well, how far has this posting been viewed? And so if there's a view icon that says how many views it has received, that's interesting information to have. If there is a chain of commentary that follows the posting, that's also really good information to have. And so that's the first thing I would do, is I'd want to capture the evidence of this commentary. The next thing you'd want to do, and I would suggest anyone doing in that situation, because illegitimate comments, defamatory comments could have professional harm, personal harm, reputational harm, all types of harm, would be to immediately issue or get a lawyer involved and have them draft a cease and desist letter, very carefully drafted, because this is going to be the point at which, you're going to suggest there could be legal action taken if the post is not removed, or they continue in that behavior. In addition, you're probably going to want to reach out to the social media platform, because they do often have their own internal mechanisms to at least jump in and assist and perhaps potentially remove postings that may be seen as defamatory, illegitimate, or otherwise. And if those don't work, if the person persists in their conduct, ultimately and regrettably, a lawsuit is generally the way that you're going to have to address it. But again, context driven. What is the complaint about? Are there other venues or other bodies that may be able to jump in there and assist with addressing it? And so, again, context driven, but without the evidence, without the recording of the evidence to substantiate the complaint, your complaint's going to probably go nowhere. So always be armed with it, capture what you can, document it, and stash that away for use for the next steps that ultimately will follow.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Anil. Jason, this next question is for you. I often hear yelling and loud noises at all times of day and night from the house next door. I worry about the safety of family members, including children. What can I do if I suspect domestic and family violence?
If it's happening at the time and you have reason to believe, or you reasonably fear for the people next door about what's happening, call 911. Every time you call 911, it doesn't mean that someone's going to go to jail. It doesn't mean that someone's going to get arrested. Often we can go there, we can try to keep the peace, we can investigate what's happened, what's causing the noise, and hopefully we'll be able to report back to you to either let you know what's happened, why it's happening. So if it's just loud noises because one person is hearing impaired, that might help put you at rest. Again, if there's children involved, there's reporting lines for the ministry throughout the province. We have our non-emergency line if you wanted to make a just-in-case report and you have specific examples, and if you documented anything, including recordings of the noise, including like stuff that's making you fear for the other people's safety, and that documentation at the daytime location, that sort of thing, is helpful to us. So we can go back with specific examples should we have to make contact with the people involved. Also on our website, the BPD website, but there's several online through Google for our intimate partner violence. We have several resources on our website that people can go in and have a look. And they're all highlighted. They'll link you directly to where you need to go. And there's so much information there. But again, when in doubt, call us. We will come to help. Our neighborhood police officers throughout our communities here locally are very informative. And if they don't know the answer, they've got the resources in place where they can call one of us that may have the answer for them.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Jason. Again, this next question is also for you, Jason. There's continued suspicious activity relating to drug trafficking occurring in our neighborhood. For example, someone riding their bike will meet somebody and it looks like they're making a drug deal. What can I do?
Two different things that come to mind. If you call 911 and you report a suspicious circumstance or a suspicious person in your neighborhood, that could be very helpful because who knows, there might be a police officer in the next block that maybe they're in time to put the pieces of that puzzle together to figure out what is going on, and if their behavior is illegal, then we can follow up with appropriate actions. You have block watch. Nothing better than a bunch of people working together that know their neighborhoods, that know what's regular and what's normal for that neighborhood, and that's additional information that will help the police investigate what's going on. And when we're speaking with that person that we do stop, it gives us a bit more information to be able to ask the right questions is probably the best way to put it. Again, Crime Stoppers, there's some people that just don't want to call the police or they don't want to get together with their neighbors or raise a big concern. So Crime Stoppers is also good. But again, you know your neighborhood and you know what should be going on there and just follow your gut with that.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And then the last of our prepared questions, also for you, Jason. As a rule of thumb, when is it appropriate to contact the police about neighbor issues?
I would like to say after you've tried all the informal resolutions, but sometimes people just aren't able to get there due to a number of reasons. Through intimidation, they just don't feel comfortable. My threshold for comfort for approaching a neighbor may be different than yours. So I don't want to put anybody in that uncomfortable position if they fear for their safety. If there is any fear for your safety or fear for damage of property, or you have that feeling where you're just like, if I go talk to them, I just feel that something's going to escalate unnecessarily, call us. So when in doubt, call us. Our call takers will work with you. They will ask you questions and try to help determine whether or not a priority response is necessary for us to get there quickly. Or do we put you in a queue? Is it something we can handle with a phone call? There's many things. But we really want to encourage people to call us. We're here to help. And I know I've said that several times, but it's true. And I know it can be intimidating to call the police. I don't particularly live in Vancouver. So calling my local police department, I give it a lot of thought because am I inconveniencing them? Are they going to think I'm silly? All those sorts of things. We're not. It's our job. And we'll let you know where you sit. There might be 30 calls holding, but we'll give you some realistic expectations of if someone's going to call, when they're going to call, or if we think it's appropriate. If your phone call is appropriate, we may give you some additional resources, some alternate resources.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I am going to turn now to the live questions. Now, I just wanted to mention that there are some questions here about fences and property. And what I would encourage is that you come back for our webinar on April 22nd, where we're going to cover topics that are fences, trees, maintaining property, parking, and conflict. So I'm not going to address those questions today. I see one of them is highly upvoted, but please come back on the 22nd for that. One question, which I believe is, oh, it disappeared on me. Oh, it's right here. Anil, when does my neighbor's right to enjoy their property outweigh my right to enjoy my property?
That's a great question. I think it comes down, and again, it's context driven. Are we in a strata? Are we in a rental housing situation, or for in a detached house? It'll all be a bit different in each situation. At the end of the day, I would say to you that it shouldn't outweigh one's right. Everyone has the right, effectively, to live in an environment without significant interference of a lengthy duration or period of time. And so it's about balancing rights, and that's how we develop a community, I would suggest. But if you're the only one who's experiencing the issue, it comes down to what is your breaking point? When is the duration has been so long and so severe that you're no longer able to deal with it or to put up with it, frankly. And that's when I think, that's the point at which I would say that your right perhaps to enjoy and to live with enjoyment and quiet enjoyment of your property perhaps comes to the forefront to take over theirs, because they're obviously impacting yours adversely. So there's no clear answer to it. Again, it's all context, but it's realistically the breaking point when you can enjoy where you live in comfort, that perhaps your rights might be being put to the back seat if you don't take action.
Excellent. Thank you, Anil. Anil, there was a question in the Q&A as well about any apps that you would recommend to measure the decibel level of noise.
You know what? I don't have one offhand, and that's only because often I'm on the defending side of these types of claims. So just see what's out there. I've never used one personally, but I know they exist. I've seen the readings. It it can be difficult to choose the best one. Frankly, I would go by the reviews. When you find potential options, there's so many reviews online. Perhaps looking at case law to suggest if they've referenced one and they've seen it, viewed it in a positive light, might be helpful. I know that I've looked at various websites, including WorkSafe BC, and they talk about decibel recording devices. And so there are different platforms that might be able to suggest the type of app that might be best able to assist you.
Excellent. Thank you. And I noticed that a lot of these questions we have addressed in the prepared questions. So if I'm not putting your question up, that may be why. Thank you again for all the questions. They're excellent. Jason, there are a couple questions here that relate to dogs off leash. So one of them here, dogs off leash in clearly marked on leash bird sanctuary of Hastings and New Brighton Park. Are bylaws and fines ever enforced?
That is traditionally an enforcement thing through the city, through their park rangers, and I think there are other bylaw people. It's very seldom that we would get called to it, or at least somebody may call and then they'll get referred to the city. I don't know the number of tickets. I know we do try to start low. It's always easy to build up, but if you start high with a lot of emotion and tickets first, where do you go from there? So often it's a verbal warning, it's an explanation of why the rules exist and what potentially could happen next time. We'll definitely document things, but as far as the number of tickets, I think the city's better off at explaining that. But we're certainly comfortable giving them should we need to, but I don't think we would start with one.
Excellent. Thank you. Here's a question. I live in Deep Cove, and several times in the last 2 years, we have drones buzzing over our house and garden and our neighbors. What would one do about this? It feels really invasive.
Transportation Canada or Transport Canada deals with drones. From my experience, there's phone numbers and contact. There's contact information on their website. If there's something that you think is intrusive or you think is for a criminal matter or it's very suspicious, you could certainly give us a call. Or if you see it being operated in a dangerous manner, just because we're not the ones who typically will give the fines for that or do whatever, we'll certainly investigate, and because public safety is our priority, so we'll go there. If they're coming in, they're buzzing operators of vessels or boats or float planes are in the area, we want to know about it.
Excellent. Thank you. And there was a question here. My apologies. Anil, this goes back to some of the evidence that people might gather, the documentation. Do I need photographic proof of a resident smoking?
It surely helps, right? When we're dealing with smoke complaints, particularly, it's sometimes very hard to isolate the source of the smoke, and a picture is worth 1,000 words. And so if it's your adjacent neighbor, and they're saying they don't smoke. Well, guess what? Having a picture of them is kind of gold. But when you live in a rental building or a condo building, for example, given how the HVAC system works and the venting and so forth, it's almost sometimes next to impossible to figure out who's smoking unless you're able to confirm it by entering into their unit or strata lot, or and having a picture just makes things infinitely more easier, and it helps mitigate or effectively nullify their ability to say it wasn't me.
Thank you.
But again, sorry to just caveat, but again,
Please.
doing it in a safe and non-intrusive manner, because the last thing we want to do is to create conflict, right? And so they may see you take the picture, fair enough, but do it in a way that try to being discreet and non-intrusive and non-confrontational is probably your best way to go do about. And if you feel unsafe taking the picture, perhaps it's a signal not to take the picture at that time.
Excellent.
So what I'm hearing is don't use a drone.
Good point.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Anil and Jason. Anil, can you draft a demand letter yourself, or do you need a lawyer? Can you draft it and have the lawyer just send it?
You can draft it yourself, right? There's nothing that says you have to have a lawyer. I think sometimes the benefits of a lawyer is the language being utilized, perhaps in a more precise fashion, and not to say that people aren't capable of being objective in the letter, but sometimes our emotion does get the better of us when we're drafting correspondence of any kind. And I can tell you, in the 10 years of doing this job, some of the emails that I've seen or the letters I've seen contain inflammatory language, and it's not helpful. It only serves to to make the issue that much more pronounced. And so having a lawyer can help, at the very least, use more neutral language, bring objectivity back into the situation with the outcome or hope of resolution. But if you're capable of doing those things in a neutral tone, but being assertive at the same time, nothing prevents you from writing a letter on your own behalf.
Excellent. Thank you, Anil. Jason, this next question is for you. Is there any way I can find out why there is a police presence in our mobile home park? For example, last week we had 2 police cars and 1 dog handler.
So in the city of Vancouver, if you go to our website, there is a section called Geodash. And Geodash is an interactive mapping tool that provides fairly real-time information on police activities. And there's plenty of filters. So you can click a certain neighborhood, a geographical area of the city. You can choose from a drop-down menu what type of offenses you would like to look at, whether it be theft from auto, stolen cars, or break-ins. And that way you'll know what's going on in your neighborhood, and you can maybe take some steps to help better protect yourself. With the specific instance that's going on, you can either go back in time. So the filters will go back for as long as we've had the system. You can go back and look, and if you're really curious and you're not able to find it there, pop into one of the neighborhood policing offices. Due to privacy issues, we may not be able to share a lot of information with you, but I think we should be sharing it with you if there's a public safety issue. All of our statistics, everything that we have is transparent. It's on our website. You just have to look for it. And if you have any questions about navigating it, there's information on our website too, who to contact.
Excellent.
If I can just go back to one other point just from earlier, it's not about this question, but something I've experienced about documentation, about the noisy neighbor, barking dog, all those sorts of things. It's kind of soothing for some of our complainants that we deal with when we give them an outlet. They're able to vent into their notes. They're able to do these things. So not every time something happens are they calling 911 anymore. They're documenting. It's giving them something to do, giving them something else to focus on. That information that you're documenting is still very important. Just because you haven't called 911 every time an incident has happened, that incident still happens, and we still take that into consideration when we're dealing with issues. But it's kind of therapeutic in some ways. I know that may sound silly, but it helps you de-escalate and bring some emotions into check.
Excellent.
And just jumping off Jason's point, and I've been in cases where the police have been involved, and I think the therapy comes in when the police actually validate the individual, and that's because they have this great documentation evidencing and particularizing all the instances of the noise, and so that you actually know. And I don't say this to sound triggering, but you don't sound crazy. right, to the police officer. It's validating because they can now see what you're seeing and hear it the way you're hearing it, and that helps.
Yeah, absolutely. Anil, this may be our last question. And you've done such a great job. And thank you, everybody, for submitting your questions. These are excellent, excellent questions. Some of them will be addressed in the future webinar. Some of them have already been addressed. This one, I think, Anil, is one that's great for you. Upstairs, strata neighbor, purposely making noise and stamping their feet hard just to bother me. I strongly believe they're racist, but of course, I can't prove it. So what are your thoughts there?
Um, won't be the first time I heard a complaint like that, but again, document it. The noise. So what will happen is after you make your complaint, and if the noise and the stomping is persistent, and your strike council has issued a letter saying stop it, what I would do is I would actually invite the council to your unit so that they can actually observe when it's occurring, the frequency of the occurrence as well. And so when you're investigating noise complaints of this nature, what should happen is that the council should be offering them, or ought to be offering themselves up to come to your unit, providing you with a phone number to call them when it's occurring so they come observe it in person, and therefore adding objectivity into the conversation about the observation of that instance. The issue of race, now, unfortunately, your neighbor doesn't owe you a human right to not be racist, right? If that's what's actually happening. But your story corporation owes you such an obligation that if there's a race-based aspect to take it into consideration when affording you accommodation, et cetera, in response. So that should, proving racism can be a bit difficult. But focusing on the issue of the stomping, there is cases out there, many cases where people have stomped, perhaps in retaliation to something that the unit below has done, but it has resulted in bylaw enforcement and been upheld by the tribunals. And so there is a remedy for you if that's happening.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Thank you again to the Blockwatch Society of BC for helping us create this webinar, for your excellent questions, for inviting your members from across the province. It has been wonderful to collaborate and work with you and welcome your members to today's webinar. Thank you to everybody who has joined us today, all the questions that you've submitted. It's been great. While we're still here, I would love to hear a little bit more from Jason and from Anil. Jason, thank you again for joining us today. Is there anything that maybe we didn't cover or that came to mind during today's session that you'd like to share with us before we wrap up?
It just doesn't matter where you live in our province, even across our country. These are universal problems. We all have them. I have them in my neighborhood, and it's teamwork. We all have to work together with our neighbors, and we have to work together with the resources that are available, but also with the police. We're here to help, and please feel comfortable saying hi to us. If you see us on the street, you see us in a donut shop, wherever you see us, please do. Like we want to, we're human. We take the uniform off, we go home. So we're part of the same community that you are.
Thank you so much. And I'll just say, Jason, a big thank you to the VPD. I'm in Vancouver as well, and I really appreciate the work that you do. It really makes a huge difference. And so a big, big thank you. And thank you, of course, for being here today and for sharing your expertise and knowledge with our guests. It's really, really wonderful. So big, big thank you.
You're welcome.
Anil, we would love to hear from you as well in terms of anything that maybe we talked about today that you'd like to highlight, or maybe something that we didn't cover that you'd like to add before we wrap up.
I think in any dispute, whether it be noise, barking, what have you, people often, I think, sometimes underestimate how much having just a frank and friendly conversation can have. And I think I go back to Jason's, one of his first points was, get to know your neighbors, befriend your neighbors. And it's a lot easier to deal with issues when you're friendly with your neighbors. Often, or at least I can say for Vancouver, sometimes we have neighborhoods where that doesn't happen the way it used to. And that's a multitude of factors that go into why things evolve as they do. But I find that, talking to my neighbors does make a big difference. We're there for each other, better able to understand each other and respond to each other's concerns when they arise. So I think that's a great tip. If context allows it, having that friendly conversation is always a great way to de-escalate situations. Sometimes the other person just might not be aware that they're doing something that's being problematic or annoying to you. So, yeah.
Absolutely. Such a great message for us to part with. And Neil, thank you so much. We appreciate you coming back to our small screen and sharing your expertise with us. It has been so helpful. And I know everybody who has joined us has really benefited from hearing from you, from hearing from Jason. I'll remind everyone once again, there will be a part two to this webinar. Again, April 22nd. The topics we will cover: fences, trees, maintaining property, parking, and conflict. There are a lot of questions in the Q&A about those topics. And so please come back. We will be providing more information. It has been such a pleasure to hold this webinar for everybody today. Thank you again for joining us. We hope to see you again on April 22nd. Bye, everybody. Thank you again.